The Last of Us just portrayed a character named David who's supposedly a Christian quoting scripture, but he turns out to be a cannibal and this is just the latest in a long line of cliches where Hollywood producers and writers keep on making Christians the brunt of the joke or the villain. They're secretly evil, they're a hypocrite. I'm going to explain the secret reason, even though some of the writers themselves may not understand this about themselves. I'm going to explain the reason why they keep on repeating this cliche over and over.
Spirit Life!
Hey, I'm Bruce on Spirit Life. Hit the subscribe button. You know, Hollywood continues to use the same cliches over and over. In fact, it doesn't just limit itself to this one particular one where they're creating the stereotypical hypocritical Christian. You know, it's actually pretty hard these days to come up with an original plot, and some of my friends don't like to watch movies with me anymore because I guess the plot from the very beginning. It's very hard to come up with a truly original plot twist these days. So it's not surprising that Hollywood is creatively bankrupt and they keep on repeating the same tropes. But the particular trope that I'm going to talk about is where they create a villain who's supposedly a Christian on the outside, but deep down, they're actually horrible, they're evil. They may or may not believe their own delusions, but they're spouting Orthodox Christianity. They're spouting traditional, conservative, biblical ideas, but they're actually a villain. And why do they keep on repeating this? It's not just because Hollywood is super left-leaning liberal. It's not just because they've run out of ideas. There's a reason that I think most of these writers keep on repeating the same cliche, and it's the same reason that most atheists are actually not following where the evidence leads, and they're actually intellectually observing what's the evidence and what's going on, and they've come to an intellectual conclusion. The same reason that atheists, most of them, choose to wave their fist at God, and the same reason that most Hollywood writers and the Hollywood producers and the elite keep on shaking their fist at God and shaking their fist at biblical morals is because they're hurt. It all boils down to the pain they've received deep down in their heart based on being offended at God himself. Maybe they thought God should have healed their loved one who passed away. Maybe they felt like God should have done something to help them, but instead they suffered. Maybe they thought that a Christian should have done X, Y, or Z. Maybe it was a pastor who should have visited them, but he overlooked them. He ignored them. Maybe it was a pastor who was teaching biblical right doctrine, and he didn't have a contradiction in his secret past or something, behind the scenes he's really contradicting himself. Maybe it's just he wasn't a good pastor. He wasn't a good shepherd. Maybe another Christian was supposed to be a Christian. They were a friend and they let them down. And at the end of the day, most atheists, most Hollywood elites who are anti-biblical, they're just hurt. Deep down in their spirit, they know that there's a God. They know that the Bible is true. They understand, their spirits understand subconsciously that the traditional, conservative, biblical values that us Christians are still trying to uphold are the truth, but they're hurt, they're wounded, and so their attempt to shake their fist at God is a subconscious reaction to that pain. In fact, they're slaves to their wound. What do I mean by a slave to their wound? Well, that means that they can't escape this defining hurt that's deep down in their heart. Is such a powerful subconscious motivator that almost all that they do when they express themselves, and let's face it, movies are a form of art. Writing a script is a form of expression. It's a form of artistic expression that comes from some deep place within. Now, a lot of Hollywood crap is just spat out from a conveyor belt like a machine. It's just, a factory that produces the same cliches over and over again to make $1. But when I'm talking about people that are really writing a script and they always fall back on the same cliche of the conservative being actually a hypocrite, they were probably deeply hurt by a Christian or by the Lord himself. There's a couple of reasons that I say this. Number one, the heart understands at an intrinsic level, at an intuitive, deep level, the things of the Lord. The Bible tells us this. In Romans 1, it says that God's invisible attributes are actually known to all through creation. There's no one out there that has an excuse to not believe in God because God has made himself evident around us. And, God designed our hearts to understand him, to know him. We were designed to be God's friend, And when we're not friends with God, something is amiss, something is not right. And people spend their whole lives trying to fill that void with drugs, sex, and rock and roll, the classic trio, or they try to go in some other route. Today, most people that are going after the woke religion, and I'm using that word religion very specifically, they're adopting a very firm stance on woke policies. They're fighting for the supposedly marginalized. They're bullying people that were traditional and conservative because they think they're the villains and they're on the right side of history and they themselves are going to rise up and be the hero of their own story. The reason they're pursuing these things is to fill that void of the friendship with the Lord Himself that they're missing in their lives. But there's another reason, and I'll end with this. You know, the cliche of the preacher who's actually got scandals going on behind the scenes, that happens. It does. Sometimes in real life, there's a truly conservative preacher who's espousing biblical views. And yet behind the scenes, there's a scandal. That happens. That happened recently with somebody I greatly admire, an apologist who was actually spot on with all of his teachings, but behind the scenes, he was indulging in sexual immorality. It doesn't mean his teachings are now false. It just means that he was a hypocrite. He wasn't following, secretly what he was espousing outwardly. That happens sometimes, but not as often as Hollywood would have you think. Most people who believe in conservative traditional doctrine, biblical doctrine, the same doctrine Jesus Himself commanded, are legitimate followers of the Lord. They really love Jesus. They're trying, though they fail and though they stumble from time to time, they're trying to follow God, and they're not perfect, just like myself. But we love God and we're not hypocrites. Though we stumble from time to time and we don't uphold the standard that we want to uphold, it doesn't mean that that standard is wrong or somehow false or whatever. It just means that it's hard to be a Christian. More often than not, a real hypocrite is the woke Christian, the progressive Christian. And the reason I say that is not because they're not well-intentioned. Woke Christians are trying their hardest to fight for what they see as justice, but it's misplaced. They're wolf in sheep's clothing, not because they're secretly trying to get people's money and deceive people knowing that they're deceiving people, but because they're not biblical. They've dismissed with the truth and the foundation of Christianity, which is Jesus' own words recorded in the Gospels. Jesus taught, for example, traditional one man and one woman marriage. But those who are teaching gay marriage as a biblical godly good, they're wolves in sheep clothing. Whether they know it or not. They think they're doing a good thing, but in reality, they're helping people to continue to sin, and they're not upholding the holiness that God desires. So this Hollywood trend of, trying to make the Christian the brunt of the joke, they're just a loser, they're just some sort of backwoods, hillbilly, redneck, unintelligent, uninformed, uneducated, intolerant bigot, or they're the villain and this kind of stuff, that is very, very rare out in the real world. Most Christians, by the way, are ethnic, they're brown-skinned, they're overseas, they're in Africa, they're in China, they're in the Middle East, they're former Muslims, they're getting born again, they love Jesus, they're sincere with all their heart, they stumble from time to time, like we all do, because we all struggle with sin. But these are people who are not some sort of nationalistic American. But then again, those of us who are American, like myself, who love Jesus, though we're not perfect, we're not hypocrites. We love Jesus. We're teaching what the Bible teaches. We're teaching what Jesus Himself taught. And because we're conservative, because we're traditional, we get a lot of pushback. We get a lot of flack from the culture around us. But we're called to be different. We're called to be unique and to be separate and not to look like and blend in with culture around us. So Hollywood, though they want to perceive themselves as the rebel, they want to perceive themselves as going against the grain, overturning the traditional narrative. Really, they're just repeating this same old cliche that's been there since Satan began his work in the Garden of Eden. Hollywood thinks they're super clever. They think that they're overturning the status quo. But really, the status quo is that the devil is the prince of the power of the air. And unless you're really counterculture and trying to pursue Jesus down the narrow road, a hard, winding, rocky path, taking your cross daily and following Jesus, unless you're doing that, you're just like everybody else who's on the broad path that everybody finds that leads to destruction. If Hollywood really, really wanted to be unique and do something that's truly a plot twist, something that's unexpected. If they really wanted a character who went against the grain, they would have a Christian, a true Christian, who genuinely loves God, sticks to biblical values, not trying to rewrite a Jesus of their own fabrication, who's some sort of role model person, but he's definitely not God in the flesh, and he's definitely not demanding holiness out of us. If you want a real and true counterculture character, then you ought to make an actual Christian who loves Jesus and who follows the real actual Bible. That, my friends, would be surprising. That would actually be a plot twist I'd be surprised to see from a Hollywood production. What do you think? Am I absolutely wrong? Do most Hollywood writers who are shaking their fist at the Lord and trying to portray the Christians as hypocrites, do they actually have a wound in their heart like I think? Or am I just way off and I'm just showing my own Christian bias? Let me know in the comments down below. Subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, share this video with somebody. This is Bruce on Spirit Life.